I feel ADHD is overdiagnosed. I mean, I feel like it probably is nowadays, but it's hard to tell when something is overdiagnosed versus when it's something that was always an issue and then people didn't notice it before. You know, like the knowledge base got better to be able to understand it better. I think autism is in that camp right now. There's so many people that probably had autism and never got diagnosed, even adults currently that are older that never got diagnosed because it just wasn't understood, right? And now it's understood. So some people are freaking out and they're like, so many more people have autism, something's causing it. And I'm more so like, I think we just have more of an issue of we didn't know how to diagnose it before, you know, and now we know how to recognize it because the research is a lot better. Still ways to go even, but right, like I think that's such a mixed question, a mixed answer, but with certain things I'm sure it's like that. With ADHD, it's hard to tell like how many people have this like innate born with it brain disorder versus how many people have just become so horrifically undisciplined that they're functionally no different, but maybe they have more of an ability to get themselves out of that. Or, you know, OCD is a little like this, right? I'm diagnosed with OCD. I've always had it since I was little. I've always had issues with this, okay? There are people who don't have it and then develop small bits of it over time because your brain is doing normal brain things, and then sometimes in responses to stress or things like that, you start to develop like this weird mechanism, this weird obsessive compulsive, you know, I'm obsessing over this idea that's worrying me and now I do this compulsion to like soothe my brain, and then that gives me a little dopamine, that gives me a little hit, so I start doing it again. And then some people like fall into it, and not all of them will get diagnosed, but some people go and get diagnosed later, right? So it's like, yeah, stress-induced OCD is a real thing. It is. So that's how I feel about ADHD right now. Like how many people have it as an innate, you know, your brain just doesn't work right from the get-go kind of thing, versus how many people just developed this issue from the way the world is right now, right? Again, the boomer talk about devices, whatever. I wonder, like, should that be diagnosed differently? I don't know. I feel like jury's out on too much stuff, and there are all these like flying around differing opinions from all these people who are not medically trained. Like I'll talk about these things, but I'm not going to be like, it needs to be this, because I don't have a PhD in this, you know? Right? But I think about it and I'm like, man, probably a distinction between those two for sure. And people with stress-induced OCD, from what they're seeing, from what studies they have done, they're finding that it's easier for those people to undo and do cognitive behavioral therapy to get out of it a bit and basically get to a point where they wouldn't be diagnosed if retested that day. Whereas people that were born with it have a lot harder issue, you know, it's different things, but it's like the same mechanism in your brain. So I guess it's the same. I don't know. It's tough. When I was getting treated, when I was getting looked at for my OCD, they specifically did a lot of asking a lot of questions, a lot of research on me, you know, and like childhood stuff to understand if this was something I had since I was little or not, because it changed a lot of how they would approach me, how they would approach my case, which I thought was really interesting. Because before that, I thought that no matter how you developed it, you probably treat it the same way, but no, they took very different approaches on how they do everything based off of that. So I was like, oh, okay. So I got put into that camp of, you know, had this since young, therefore, you know, we do things a little differently. Whereas a lot of the people that they would treat, they said a lot of people, it was stress-induced. And they said it was, for this doctor, a lot of the, more of the people that they treated were stress-induced. So like their approach was whatever. And then they were like, oh, you've always had this. And I was like, yeah. And they were like, oh, okay. And they started going through different sets of questions and stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess there is a big difference. I don't know. Your current treatment for OCD is zero because the compulsions were so bad compared to the typical CBT. Oh God. Yeah, it could be really rough. Edgar roleplay. Yep. Emotional roleplay. Actually, so there are a lot of different types of OCD, right? They get put into different categorizations, and there's one categorization that is called, there are a few that kind of fall under like the romantic or whatever kind of category, but there is relationship OCD, which could also be like friendships, family, etc. But there are people where what their brain tends to focus on and worry about and spiral on as the obsessive part of it is they think about their relationships with other people and they get worried, right? And they can't stop thinking about, do these people actually enjoy me? Whatever. And then they start testing people. There are types of OCD that are like that, right? Where like, it just looks like a person where you normally look at them and you'd be like, oh, they're just so weird. They're just so, she's just crazy or whatever, right? But But then you have issues with feeling like, do people actually enjoy me or whatever? And now I have to test. So your compulsion becomes like either you push people away every time they get close, or you start testing them, like asking them certain questions or making them over and over and over affirm or reassure you of something. And it messes with relationships because those people will be like, why do you keep asking me this, right? You'll be like, Mom, do you actually love me? And they'll be like, yes. And they'll be like, but how do I know? Do you though? And they'll ask them every day. And it just turns into this thing, right? So one person had trouble with that and kept pushing people away, whatever. And one of the things that they were told was legitimately like to just ERP. This girl played MMOs and stuff, and she had a really hard time with like getting close to anyone romantically because she felt like the moment you do, you have to start pushing them away. And part of her cognitive behavioral therapy is they were like, bro, just ERP online. Like, honestly, just get used to it in this online setting so you can get used to like this kind of stuff, and then maybe you can apply it to real life. And it actually worked really well for her. I always thought that was like, it was such a funny scenario, but like it worked out, you know? So I'm like, okay, I guess. The exposure response is insane for OCD. That depends on the person too. I don't know. For me, like there's so many different little issues that I had, but I would sit there and like the word I would always use was like I had to digest words. So one of the things I would do is I would be reading and I would have to count the letters and I would have to group them in certain ways. And if I didn't do that, my brain would purposefully not remember the word I was trying to read. And I couldn't stop myself from doing it. And that was unbearable because it would make me be unable to read. I could not move forward. Literally couldn't stop myself. I would or I not even couldn't stop myself. I would stop myself and I couldn't undo that. And I would sit there and stare at a word on a page. And if I didn't do this process, I could not remember what I would be actively looking at the word and I would be like, I cannot interpret this. My brain would not let me store that in my memory, which was crazy. And I had to do this process to like, then like my brain would allow me to read the word. Yeah, it's really frustrating. And so I would do this little process really fast with like counting and like grouping some things in a certain way. And I would look at the word, do that, and I learned to do it so fast my brain would just do it automatically, and then I would read the word. And now that I don't do that as much, now I'm like really fast at reading because I can just go because I had to try and keep up in school, and I didn't tell anyone that I had this issue for a long time. So I would just do this in my head when reading, and I would keep up with, you know, schoolwork and stuff, and it was just bad, dude. It was bad. But the good news is I would remember how to spell a lot of words. I was really good at spelling, really good at spelling because I would do that. So that helped, I guess. Was this a thing even when you learned to read super early? Yes. I was reading really young, so I don't remember everything from like my first little bits of reading ever, but from as far back as I can remember, I was doing that. The process changed over time. It wasn't always the same thing that I would do when I'd be like counting little letters and moving them around in my head or whatever. But at the very least, anytime I was in school, I definitely did it. And I'm pretty sure I remember doing it earlier, but it's like, you know, hazy kid memories and stuff. So I don't know, dude. Did you notice these things yourself or did someone else have to point it out? I was always aware. I was always aware, but I did it so quickly that it didn't cause me a problem, or so I thought. It wasn't causing me any issues. I wasn't unable to keep up in class. I would actually finish reading passages before other people still, and would close the book and be sitting there and waiting for other people to finish reading a passage. So because of that, because there was no resulting issue, I didn't bring it up. I just didn't for a long time. And then, you know, at some point I got old enough where I was like, you should point out things that aren't normal. Right? So I did eventually. But other stuff got noticed because a lot of the stuff that I did was purely in my head. I didn't have a lot of physical compulsions. So there really wasn't much to notice. But there were a few things that were noticed. One of my teachers pointed out that when I would write notes, I would go back over and retrace what I wrote a lot. And sometimes I would do it to a scary degree. So sometimes like I would bleed the pen ink through the paper entirely to like the next page down because I would just be going over and over and over. Like the page would be wet. And I would use all my pens really fast and I would go back over it. And some teachers noticed it but didn't say anything. They thought I was just bored because I would like finish an assignment quickly or something. But I know what it was. It was because I would write something and it wouldn't feel right or wouldn't look right. So I'd do it again and then I'd do it again. And now that I did it again, here's what I would do. Let's say you write a whole page's worth of notes. And the first letter, you write the, right? And the T, something about it doesn't feel right, doesn't look right. So I trace over it. Now the boldness If everything else is in 1 point and this one's in 2-point thickness, now I'm like, it looks uneven. And I would go and make everything on the page 2-point, right? Where I would go through and I'd like make it equally bold. And then some of those would be a little bolder because I wouldn't be doing it perfectly. And I would just be like, and I would do it more. And I think this is a thing that enough people do, but I would do it every day and I would do it constantly. And if I didn't do it, the level of stress I would feel was insane. And someone noticed that it was a problem when a teacher could not get me to not do it. When they said, hey, you need to hand this in. And I got so like stressed that I couldn't even explain why. I had no words and I was just like tunnel visioning on it. And they were like, okay. And thank God this teacher knows. They were like, okay, something is really off here. Because I was like so normal otherwise. And I just had this thing I did. And yeah. That was like the first thing that got noticed because I feel like everyone does little things like that, but there was some that, you know, the level to which I did, the severity was really high. That's the part people often miss when they're like, oh yes, I totally count tiles while I'm walking as well, so I'm so OCD. Oh my God, I know. There's other stuff. I mean, I'm describing the ones that are like easiest to describe. There's a lot of stuff with like visualization and things that like being unable to will away certain things. You ever have like strong mental imagery, right? You ever like daydream, and sometimes you daydream so hard that the visual centers of your brain, right? What you're seeing in front of you with your eyeballs is not what's at the forefront of what's visually happening in your brain, right? It's just daydreaming. Everyone does it. Sometimes I would have issues with being unable to stop visualizing something. And that was the most difficult thing to get rid of. Or I would sit around and be doing a thing. You have those moments where you're like, your brain thinks a morbid thought here and there because it's like a normal mechanism, a survival mechanism, right? You'll be like holding something heavy and like someone walks next to you and you imagine yourself dropping it on their foot and you're like, oh, don't do that. Your brain does that to remind you like, hey, this bad thing can happen, so don't. And then you like grip the container better, right? Something like that. I had huge issues with not being able to will that away. So that was one of my worst. That one I still have, but not as bad. But that is really, really, really hard to like get rid of. And it's bad because I also have really like strong visualizations of everything. And so then my brain, instead of sitting there and imagining like a singular scene and being like, oh, let me make sure that doesn't happen, I would imagine the next like 30 minutes, the aftermath, everything. Because then I'd be like, oh God, I got to think through all the worst possible scenarios and what I would do in those cases. And if I don't sit there and think through them, and I'm not prepared. That's what my brain would tell me, right? Then I'm not prepared for it. So then I'd literally stand there. This is when I went to like when I was like, I need to see someone and work on this, because I would sit there holding a heavy thing, right? And I would think about like this negative thing that could happen, but I would just stand there literally for 5 minutes, standing still. And if someone would watch me, they'd look at me and I'd just be standing there doing nothing. My head would be full of thoughts, but I'd be standing there just looking at the thing I was holding, like, yeah, standing man emoji. And I'm just, you know what I mean? I'm just like making sure in my head that I know what to do or whatever. And I would like ruminate on this stuff. And it wasn't until I realized how long I was spending doing that sometimes that then I was like, okay, now I need to like do something about this. And that was when I went and got taken care of. And now I don't stand there for 5 minutes ruminating on stuff like that, obviously, right? Like I've spent years working on that. But that definitely is like one of those types of OCD that I feel like people don't talk about. They think it's always like, oh, this book on this shelf is tilted and I'm gonna make it stand up straight. Oh, these two things stacked on each other, the corners don't match up, I'm gonna match the corners. They do that and they're like, I'm so OCD, haha. And I'm like, brother, that's not what it is. That's such a small portion of people that have it too. It's more so people with like doing shit in their brain like I would do. Rumination is one of the things your wife gets caught up in real bad, and is how her OCD shows up the most. Yeah, that was the worst for me, was having to sit there and think a scenario over and over. I'm a results-oriented person, right? So I would sit there and I'd be like, okay, if this bad thing happens, what are all the different ways it could happen? I gotta sit here and visualize it so I can like picture it and be prepared, which meant I'd have to sit there and visualize a bunch of shit that I don't want to visualize at all, right? You like end up getting distressed depending on what you're visualizing because of that, and you can't will the images away. You can't just be like, don't, haha, like you can with most thoughts. So like you do that, and then you'd think through every scenario, or I would think through every scenario and like go through, okay, what do I do if this happens? What do I do if that happens? Blah, blah, blah. And like the next thing you know, I've just been standing in a spot for 5 minutes. which is terrible. Terrible. And then sometimes I'd start doing shit that was almost like nesting. I'd start like putting items in certain places so I could feel prepared in case something happens. So now I don't do this, but for the longest time I had like band-aids and Neosporin and stuff in a drawer in every room, or I always had to carry certain things on me. I had issues where I was one of the hand over washers. I would wash my hands all the time. And I couldn't let people like touch me because I'd think about transferring of skin and oils and shit like that, right? I was like crazy. So I would bring baby wipes and things like that with me literally everywhere. And so if someone like touched my arm, I could be like, well, I'm fine. I don't need to be stressed about this, because I could pull out a wipe and go and wipe my arm. And then I would, I would try to do it like secretly so people wouldn't see it. So that way they wouldn't think I'm like finding them disgusting, because then I'd be like, I don't want them to feel like shit. But like, yeah, I used to carry stuff like that with me literally everywhere. Having band-aids in your wallet isn't so bad. It's not a bad thing at all. It's still a good thing. But being like, I have to have some in my car. I have to have some in this bag. I have to have some in that bag. I have to have some in, this desk drawer. I have to, right? Like it was to a bad degree. And if I would sit there, sometimes I would just like picture a scenario happening, and then I'd be like, where are my nearest band-aids? And if they weren't like close, I would get up, go get some, and put them somewhere nearby. Right? Like I'd have some shit I was supposed to do, and instead my brain would be like, this is more important, and I would go do that thing, right? Yeah, coming up with plan F for band-aid scenarios. Yeah. Exactly. So it's stuff like that. Like when you have that strong of issues with it, then you should go see somebody. If you're just like you're ruminating a little bit, I mean, talking to someone's still good, but it's not the worst,